We start with a drug dealer called Fontaine going about his daily routine in his hometown ghetto of the Glen, which includes buying booze and scratch cards at the shop and then chatting shit with a local tramp. Later, he makes sandwiches for his mum, but she refuses to open the door and just says, "I don't want no stinking sarnies, so shut up about it already." And after finding out his evening's take is short a few grand, he heads on over to the local pimp's place to find out why he's holding out on him. But this slick Charles fella is too busy getting into a tiff with his prized hoe, Yo-Yo, because she won't shut up about Bitcoin and shit. Anyway, after she storms out and passes a pissed off Fontaine in the parking lot, he promptly shakes the pimp down for his drug money, before getting some instant karma when he's lit up and promptly deaded by rival drug dealer Isaac. And Slick is pretty pissed too, cause the only ones allowed to get penetrated in his motel area is Horde of Whores, and only if he gets his 60% cut. But shockingly, said Fontaine fella seems perfectly fine the next morning, and goes back to his same damn routine of booze, scratchies and homeless blokes. And after seeing a weird half-dead chap shuffling down the street and a blacked-out motor chasing him, he just shrugs and goes home, where his off-screen mum still don't want none of his stinking sandwiches. Liberties! Later, he goes back to Slick's motel to get his drug money, and he just can't believe that this 50 Cent cosplayer has somehow come back from the dead after getting shot 9 times. But he just says, "What you talking about, Willis?" Cause I think I'd remember getting lit up like a Christmas tree and then doing that dying thing. So they track down that fine-ass chocolate hoe Yo-Yo to prove it, because she totally saw him there yesterday in the motel parking lot shortly before he got yeeted worse than a Hillary Clinton whistleblower. And after she confirms she defo heard said gunfire and deadly exchange of bullets, they drive around for a bit trying to make sense of things, before this Fonty fella totally recognises that weird blacked out car from earlier, and so goes into the empty house it's randomly parked outside of and finds a secret elevator behind a closet. And once downstairs, they emerge into a super secret lab where they find some white boy with an afro dancing to a Michael Jackson tune. And whilst Fontaine interrogates the cowardly caretaker what loves cultural appropriation, Slick Charles finds some weird powder what makes him giggle like a little schoolgirl when he tastes a bit of it. So he then takes over the interrogation between fits of said giggles, and as that Yo-Yo hoe messes around with some random chemicals, she totally gives Slick Charles a little fright, which makes him accidentally murder that afro honky cracker fella what loves Michael Jackson tunes. And on their way out, Fontaine finally finds himself, and not in a spiritual way. Damn! Naturally, they get the heck out of Dodge after finding a secret lab with their own mate's corpse inside it, and then try to keep their heads down for the night. But by the time Fontaine returns the next morning, the closet is totally empty, and he just can't believe he's been gaslit by a secret elevator what was never there. Or some shit. So the gang head over to the local chicken joint to try and figure out what's going on over some tasty fried poultry. But suddenly, everyone starts bursting out in fits of giggles, and reminded me of my rather cruel girlfriend on the night I lost my V-plates. Bruh. And this slicky fella reckons that they've put whatever that powder was what he found last night in their bargain bucket. And he starts seriously thinking about reporting them to the FDA, given their chicken meat seems to be pumped full of chemicals and shit. But then he remembers that that's just pretty standard in American cuisine, so such a complaint will likely get nowhere and be a total waste of time. LOL! So that ho-ho yo-yo bird just seduces the manager so she can snoop around in his office, and quickly finds out that some mysterious scientists have been taking notes about the effects of the chemicals on the populace, and also watching their every move in town via crafty surveillance cameras. So she then tells them all about what she just found, and how they're all part of some Alex Jones type conspiracy theory, where the government seems to be experimenting on black neighbourhoods again. Just like that Tuskegee study where they gave them all the clap and shit. Anyway, they then follow a suspicious van moving suspicious goods, and after she finds a pic of a young black boy in his car on the drive over, Fontaine reveals how he once had a little brother called Ronnie, who totally got shot by a racist cop a few years ago when he was just a kid. But he don't like to talk about gay shit like his feelings and stuff, so tells her to put that photo back where she found it and shut up about it already. Once they trail the suspicious van to its destination, They tell poor Slick to go check out what's in the bag, whilst the other two enter a hair salon and find the product that they were delivering seems to also contain chemicals which makes the locals all super quiet and pretty docile when pasted into their hair. And before you can say, "Where can I get some of that for my mother-in-law?" they're soon confronted by that rival gang lord Isaac, what totally murdered Fontaine the other night. And he just can't believe how bad of a shot he must be, given he pumped 9 slugs into this fella and seems to have somehow missed every organ and major artery. But before he can rub his enemy's nose in his miraculous resurrection, the van then drives off with their slick mate in the back. So naturally, they try to make their escape, whilst Isaac promptly threatens to kill him when he sees them next, even though the last time he tried to do that, he totally failed miserably. Anyway, after following the van to a church and freeing the local pimp, they find another one of them super secret elevators hidden away under the altar, and soon discover a giant fuck-off lab facility down there. And after stealing some hazmat suits, they take an unsanctioned tour and witness a bunch of black people being subject to disturbing experiments. And I don't mean having to eat chicken wings with mayonnaise instead of hot sauce, but rather conditioning them with mind control and stuff. Later, they eventually come to some sort of neon cryogenics lab, where they find a bunch of African American clones in fridge freezer tanks, including straight up copies of that Fontaine fella and the notorious PIMP. And after setting off the alarms by trying to shoot themselves in the head despite it being bulletproof glass, they exit the lab, which comes out in the back room of their local strip club, where the Caucasian DJ is busy brainwashing the black punters by bombarding them with mind-melting white folk songs like Mr. Brightside all night. Or some shit. And said Caucasian DJ then sticks the mob of zombie black peeps on the group. And after their car conks out, they're soon surrounded by the chocolatey mob. And it looks like it's curtains for the local drug dealer, sex pimp and hoe, aka your standard pillars of the ghetto community. But suddenly, they all stop dead in their tracks like friggin' Westworld hosts who have frozen all motor functions. And the gang are soon confronted by a middle-aged white bloke called Nixon and his henchman Chester, who is totally one of them clone fellas who looks exactly like Fontaine, only with more testosterone in shit. And although this Nixon fella says he's just the clean-up crew and totally not the head honcho of the whole madcap scheme, he at least has the decency to drop some exposition for the audience, and soon reveals how their top scientists conduct unethical experiments in broadcast ghetto black communities, so that nobody notices or really cares when brothers go missing or shuffle about like spiced up zombies in the street. And this then lets the naughty researchers experiment on the people in peace, so that they can then learn how to achieve unity between the races in America. Or some shit. Nixon then uses the code words Olympia Black to mind control the pair of phony fakey clones, and then threatens to have Fontaine totally Cobain himself, all to prove a point. But then just lets them go because clones are friggin' expensive, bro. I mean, just ask Joe Biden's handlers. Anyway, the next morning, Fonty Boy tells Yo-Yo that he can't be asked to keep going down this rabbit hole given he's just a gangbanger what was born in a tube, and then falls into even more of a depression when he finds out his mum not only hates his cooking but is also just a tape recorder on a loop. So he smashes up the gaff and has a little cry on a step. But after visiting his local pimp and realising he never really had a little brother who was killed by the local filth and thus he should probably just get over it already, he starts to want some sweet payback, bro. Whilst Yo-Yo hilariously tries to mail a dossier of evidence what she's gathered against the American government and soon gets herself kidnapped and imprisoned like a right, Wally. And after they realise she's missing and likely got herself locked up in solitary confinement without charge or trial, aka your local January 6th protester, the lads come up with a scheme to totally get down there and break her out. Which basically involves pulling some more Westworld shit by having rival dealer Isaac shoot him in the arm and then totally playing dead, so that the government spooks can retrieve his phony fakey corpse and deliver it down to the super secret lab directly. Which they totally do, and before you can say, why would they think he's dead if he was just shot in the arm and wouldn't they have checked for a pulse first? Slicky boy Charles rallies the community, and also Isaac's army of thugs now he's revealed what's been going on in his own hood all this time. And said Isaac fella totally doesn't have to be asked twice to go down into an underground lab to shoot up some stuffy honkies while doing a bunch of bad things to his black brothers and sisters. So they all head down and tear some shit up, whilst Yo-Yo the Ho-Ho uses a sudden distraction to take out her guards and promptly get the heck out of Dodge after ripping off her weave because reasons are presumably some sort of symbolism and shit. Whilst elsewhere, a bunch of violent hoodlums are smashing up property and looting shelves. And before you can say, so it's either the summer of love all over again or just a standard Tuesday in San Francisco, Slick and Yo-Yo totally reunite and eventually take out that Nixon fella, whilst Fontaine faces off with his own shadow and then tries to overcome his own ego. Rather literally. But unfortunately, he gets totally murked before being taken to meet the big boss. And in a shocking twist what no one could ever see coming, turns out the architect behind it all was his older self in prosthetic movie makeup.
No way!
And he then explains how he's totally a supremacist eugenicist who's joined forces with the white man in order to create peace. And he's aiming to do all this by forcing equality on humanity by literally whitewashing the black race through mind control and multi-generational breeding. And that the racialist murder of his little bro by bigoted copper all them years back prompted him to start cloning himself because reasons. And after explaining that the country would be better off with assimilation rather than annihilation of the African race, Fontaine suddenly remembers that white Afro caretaker guy from earlier what loved Michael Jackson tunes. And before you can say, are they really implying the King of Pop was one of these failed race change experiments too? Fonty Boy decides he don't really want to become a pale-skinned Caucasian abomination just to suit his original Salesforce eugenics program. So instead uses the clone's trigger phrase to coerce Chester to totally turn on his creator. And it looks like it's curtains for the actual black face of white supremacy and also the oldest Fontaine in the room, as all the clones are then released into the streets, as the mainstream news is finally forced to cover a scandalous story of shady government agents doing a bunch of bad things on their own frigging citizens.
Finally!
And we end with Yo-Yo saying she don't want to be no ho-ho no mo. And Slick Charles also says he's given up the pimp life, now there's likely a bunch more underground labs with clones to set free, and also because his one Yo-Yo ho is now just retired anyway. And Fontaine says he'd quite like to travel the world, given he's technically only a few days old, but first agrees to tag along with them to Memphis to go liberate some more cloney peeps. Or some shit. And before he can say, cloned lives matter, we cut to LA, where another bloke who looks exactly like said Fontaine fella wakes up and repeats his daily routine of booze, scratch cards and traps, before going back to the crib to chill with his homies in front of the TV, as a news report shows how a bunch of Dazed Naked peeps have turned up in the streets. And as the reporter goes to interview one of the said stupefied peeps, the gang see a black bloke on TV that looks exactly like the dude they're smoking weed with right now, and they just can't believe the naughty government have gone and cloned their mate Tyrone. And that's it. That's the movie. But man, what an inspiring moral message this movie has, which tells us that in order to break the monotonous or toxic cycles we're often stuck in our lives, all we need to do is take responsibility for our communities and regain our own agency. Primarily by breaking into secret underground labs and smacking up a bunch of white gammons in lab coats. Wowzers! Who knew solving all your problems was that easy? And speaking of, my favourite part was where black people were literally being held down by white folk while strapped to tables, and thereby prevented from rising to freedom or even their true potential. Because total lack of subtlety, bro. But anyway, that's the plot and that's your lot. Considering that bell thing so you don't miss any future recaps. Tell me if you like this flick in the comments if you have time, and I'll see you in the next one.